It's time to move on. I can see Collette is there ready to rock. Hello, Collette. It's lovely to have you joining us
Hi,
today.
good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. It's great to see you. Thank you so much. So Collette is going to talk about the top 10 tips for an effective CV. This is the kind of thing that people constantly seem to need reassurance on and need upgrading on. So you are the woman. We've been making notes at a frantic pace.
Hopefully, yeah.
You're from Engage Life Coaching.
Yeah.
And so Collette Bryson, I will leave it to you. You have about 20-25 minutes to chat. And we'll have about 5 minutes for questions at the end. So if people watching have questions, they can pop them in the chat function and I'll come back to you at the end with them. But in the meantime, Collette, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Let's just get the technology bit
Sure thing.
sorted.
Bit of screen sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Oh, this is looking promising. This is always the fun bit.
Now, just
there you are.
Second, there I am. I do say when we used to have hairdressers.
Oh, do you remember those days? Well, they're back again now.
Well, I'm waiting. Yeah, I'm waiting.
If you could get an appointment.
Can't come soon enough. Okay, so I'm ready to go.
Okay.
So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I know it's lunchtime, so I hope you've managed to get a break and it's been a busy day for all of you. So I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of my top 10 tips for an effective CV. So hopefully you'll walk away with something useful and maybe something you hadn't considered before in relation to your CV, because there's nothing as disheartening as sending out loads and loads and loads of CVs and not getting anything back. So if that's happening, hopefully some of these tips will help you. So I'm Collette Bryson, and as Ruth said there, I run Engage Life Coaching. I've been doing that for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was a solicitor and I worked in general practice, 2 different practices for about 20 years. So I've done a bit of a career change, and this is what I'm doing now. So before I get into my tips, I just wanted to talk briefly about what even is a CV. Why do we do them? What's the purpose of them? So contrary to what you might have thought and contrary to what you might have been doing up to now, your CV isn't your life story. So you don't need to put every single thing that you've ever done into your CV. So if you're finding your CV is very long, think about that. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. But why do a CV? So 2 things really. Your CV is really like your marketing brochure. So imagine yourself, a bit impersonal, but imagine yourself as a product and that you're marketing that product. So think about a glossy brochure for a car or a washing machine or whatever it is that you might be in the market for. Your CV has to do the same job for you. So it has to tell all the good things about you, all the features and benefits and wonderful things that you have, to get the reader interested. So the main point of the CV is to get you into interview, where then you can talk about all those wonderful things in a lot more detail. So it's got to get you up to the top of the pile. So just a couple of statistics for you that you might be shocked to hear. Your CV, very generally speaking, doesn't get much time. About 8 seconds, you'll even find 7 seconds if you Google it. So you've got to think about what's going to catch the reader's eye in that first 7 or 8 seconds. What are they looking for? On average, and you'll find different figures for this as well, but there might be 250 applications for one job. And out of those 250 CVs, that's got to be whittled down to maybe 5 or 6 people who are going to go forward for interview. So that's the job of your CV, is to try to get you to the top of that pile, to try to get you from application stage to interview stage. So before I get into running down the top 10, think about this every time you're sending out a CV. Who is going to be reading it? And what are they actually looking for? So try to put yourself into the shoes of the person who is reading it. So depending on the circumstances, those could be different people but they'll generally have the same aim. So it could be a recruitment consultant that's reading it. So they're the gatekeepers for certain jobs. They have jobs there. They're going to want to put candidates forward. They're looking for the best candidate. It could be if you're applying directly to a company, if it's a big company, it could be the HR manager. So again, they have a problem to solve. They have a vacancy and they want to fill it with the best person and as quickly as possible. Or it could be the employer themselves. So if it's a smaller company, the employer could be doing all the legwork in relation to recruiting themselves. So they could have drafted the ad, they could be plowing through all the CVs, be doing the interviews themselves. So the employer is going to be a very busy person usually, and if they're running their own business, they want to spend their time running their business, not their time recruiting. So that's why, you've got to stand out. Or the other person who could be reading your CV might actually not be a person at all, and it might be a robot. So you might have heard of this software, sometimes called applicant tracking software, or ATS, and it could be scanning your CV before a human being even gets to look at it at all. And it could be dismissing your CV or bringing you to the top of the pile, depending on what it's looking for. So usually it's looking for keywords. So I have some tips about that as we go along. So think about that. The next time you're sending out your CV, who's reading it and what are they looking for? So I'm going to take a sip of water to run down my top 10 tips. So the first thing I will say to you is edit your CV for each and every application that you are making. So don't just prepare your CV and say, now I'll send that one CV out to every single job application that I'm interested in. If you're doing that, you're probably doing yourself a little bit of a disservice. So one fit CV does not fit all job applications. Tailor or edit your CV each time you're sending it out. So this is a way to try and beat the bot, beat the applicant tracking software. Read the job specification carefully. What I would do, I'm a pen and paper girl, I would print out the job specification and I would go through it with a highlighter or a red pen and I would highlight the keywords. And then I would try and make sure that those keywords are appearing in my CV. Obviously within the realms of fact and without, just copy and pasting the job description, because that's going to look a bit obvious. But try to match up those keywords. What are the essential requirements in the job? And is your CV showing that? So that's my number one tip. Number two is make sure that you have a good profile paragraph. I'm calling it here a snappy profile paragraph. If you haven't done your CV for a lot of years, your previous CV may not have had this, but really make sure that you have a good introduction profile paragraph in your CV. If that's the only thing that might be read, then you want to make it engaging. You want to make sure you have essential requirements highlighted there. So if, for example, the job ad says you must have 5 years management experience, then make sure that that 5 years management experience is there in flashing lights almost in your profile paragraph. You want to pique the interest of the reader, make them want to read on, make them think, oh, God, I really like the sound of this person. I'd like to meet them. I'd like to interview them. You want to highlight your value, your best points, those keywords, you want to have them there, any key achievements or skills that are needed. And a good tip is, and this is throughout your CV, not just in your profile, if you can refer to any figures or statistics or percentages or anything like that, it's good because it pops off the page. So that's another tip. And if you can put that in your profile, so much the better. Third tip, something to think about, what to leave out of your CV. So sometimes we're afraid to leave something out in case it's important and we want the person reading it to know every single thing that we've ever done. But test everything that you're saying in your CV with that question there at the top. Why am I including this? Is it relevant? Is it going to add to that glossy brochure? So I put a couple of points there. Your address, I'm not going to say put it in or don't put it in, because I think it can be a judgment call sometimes, but ask yourself, why do I need to put my address in the CV? Does the reader need to know this? So for example, if you lived in Dublin and you were applying for a job in Cork, would it work for you or against you to put in your address? Or if you lived in Naas and you were applying for a job in Naas Main Street, then would it work for you or against you to put in your address? So just consider that. There's no hard and fast rules. If it makes sense, put it in. Absolutely avoid anything that could lead to discrimination against you. Your date of birth, your marital status, religion, anything like that, that is one of the discrimination grounds, leave it out. Ageism exists, sexism exists, all kinds of isms exist, so just be careful about that. Don't give anybody any reason to dismiss your CV, even if they're not kind of consciously doing that. Anything irrelevant, like jobs from years ago, maybe qualifications that you don't use or aren't necessarily needed for the job that you're going for. Again, ask yourself, why am I including this? Is it helping me or is it hindering me? And make a judgment call on it. No need to put your referees' names and contact details on your CV. If the CV's job is to get you to interview, then your referees aren't going to be called until further down the process, when you're getting a job offer, hopefully. Consider your email address. Just take a second and think, what email address am I using for my job applications? Is it an unprofessional email address? Is it a nickname or something like that? It can result in your CV being dismissed immediately if it is an unprofessional, rude, jokey, offensive, whatever it might be. So it gives an impression of you. So think about that. If in doubt, just get a new plain Gmail account or something and use that to send out your applications, and just make sure that the email address on your CV is the same one that you're using to send out the applications. Be succinct. So if your CV is only getting 7 or 8 seconds of reading time, if you have a 5-page CV, it is not going to all be read. If you have important information on page 4 of that 5-page CV, the person reading it mightn't even reach it. So ideally, and generally, there can be exceptions to this, but usually no more than 2 pages. Nice and clean and clear font and formatting. So nothing fancy or curly or swirly or anything like that. Lots of nice white space. My own advice, and again, this depends, but generally speaking, nothing fancy like tables or photos or logos. Sometimes they confuse that scanning software. So black and white, good clear type, plenty of white space, bullet points are good. And just be wary of waffle. Your CV is no place to be kind of waxing lyrical about things. You could do that in an interview, not in a CV. And be careful as well about using jargon. So again, think of the person reading the CV. Are they going to understand what it is that you're telling them, or is it jargon from another workplace or another industry that you're using? On the subject of that, my next tip, number 6, is to mind your language. And what I mean here is, I would advise that you use good, strong, clear, descriptive language on your CV. So focusing on achievements. Phrases that are achievement-based are much stronger, much more impressive than just listing what your roles and duties were in your previous job. So you want to focus on your achievements, really the results. What did you do and what results did you achieve? So a tip, good strong action verbs, and there's a few: managed, collated, completed, negotiated, implemented, organized. If you just Google strong action verbs for CV, you'll get lists of them online. So instead of saying I was responsible for, you can say I managed, or whatever it might be. And another tip is maybe to say how you did it. So how did you manage? I strategically managed. How did you negotiate? I successfully negotiated. So pepper your CV with real life examples and results. Again, evidence and statistics are good. So things like I led a team of 10. I was responsible for a budget of 5 million. I increased sales by 20%. Things like that pop off the page and are really impressive. Be aware just of repeating yourself. If you find that you're using the same word over and over, like managed, I managed this or I managed that, just change it up so it doesn't become boring and repetitive. Use the thesaurus, think of another word that means the same. Same goes for cliches. So cliches are phrases that are overused. And if I'm reading or skimming through 250 CVs and everybody is saying the same thing, I'm going to get a bit tired of reading it. It's going to lose its value somewhere in there. So an example of that might be good team player. So you might be a good team player, and it might be important for the role that you're going for to say you're a good team player. But if 50 people are saying good team player, it just loses a bit of its impact. So think of another way to say it. Say you're a collaborative employee or something different. Think of a different way. Use better language. Avoid the term was responsible for. Just because you were responsible for something doesn't necessarily mean that you did it. So try to focus on the achievements or the results. So just to give you a few examples of that. So there's some phrases in grey down the left there that are okay. There's nothing wrong with them. But can you make them better? So responsible for budget, working with key stakeholders on projects could become estimated and negotiated appropriate budget figures with key stakeholders, successfully within budget and on time. So what did I do? I estimated and negotiated. How did I do it? Successfully, within budget and on time. Same with, and there's just an example of putting in the figures. Team manager also responsible for recruitment of team members. Nothing wrong with that, but maybe you could make it a bit better. Recruited and managed teams of up to 8, built strong team relationships, resulting in increased productivity of 8%. So there's, a couple of statistics that can pop off the page. Same goes for your hobbies and interests. Give a little bit more. If you just say reading, that's a bit blah. Say a little bit more more interesting, a bit more strong language. Number 7 is just to deal with your work experience. So generally speaking, and in most cases, you will be listing your work experience in reverse chronological order. So the last job I had, the job before that, the job before that, in most cases. Or you could do it a different way. And again, if you Google this, you'll find examples. Functional CV. So if you're maybe changing industries or changing sectors, or you're returning after a gap, you might want to put your more relevant experience first, or pull out some skills and achievements to highlight those, and particularly useful if you're just returning to the workforce. Consider that not all your previous jobs need to be listed. You want really to be concentrating on the last maybe 10 to 15 years of your career. If you had summer jobs or temporary jobs or jobs in a different industry from years ago, you don't necessarily need to list them. And if you've had lots of jobs, you could consider using headings and grouping your jobs under headings like, 2011 to 2016, various retail jobs, something like that. Use a grouping. If you have a gap in your chronology, think about whether you use your CV to explain that or not. That's actually my next tip. Mind the gap. So if you have a gap, in my opinion, a lot of people put too much emphasis on gaps. Loads of people have had gaps for various reasons. I've had gaps, redundancy, childcare, minding relatives, anything like that. Consider if it's relevant at all to mention it. It might be something better dealt with at interview or perhaps in a cover letter. But you can mention it in your CV if you think you should. So tip there is, the longer ago your gap was and the shorter it was, really the less relevant it is. So if it's long ago and it was for a couple of months, I wouldn't even bother at this stage. If it's now and you're returning to the workforce, you might want to say something perhaps in a cover letter. If it's 2 years ago and you traveled the world, you might want to put that into your CV. So just consider whether you'd say it. So planned career break, traveling, things like that are fine to put into your CV if you want. If it's for any other reason, just be careful about what you're letting the employer know, just in case there's that kind of latent discrimination lurking around somewhere. But whatever the reason for the gap, be positive about it. You're returning to the workforce now, you're ready to go, you're ready to hit the ground running. So be positive about it. You don't necessarily need to mention it at all. Be prepared, I'd say, at interview to answer that question. Little bugbear of mine for number 9, the use of the first person in a CV. Don't often hear the third person, but if you're drafting your CV with I did this and I did that, just remove the I. It sounds much stronger. You don't often see Margaret or Mary or Tom or Michael in a CV, but sometimes it's in a profile or maybe a LinkedIn profile. So just consider the difference there. I implemented a new account system, change it up, make it stronger, successfully implemented a new account system on time and within budget. So don't use I or she or he in a CV. My last tip, number 10, and if you take nothing else away from this talk today, please, please, please proofread your CV before it goes anywhere. Once you hit that send button, you cannot get it back. So if you hit that send button and you then see 3 typos, they're gone. You can't do anything about it. So my advice, print out a hard copy. Again, take out the red pen or the highlighter, go through it line by line. Even better, give it to somebody else with a fresh pair of eyes to look at it. Often we don't see things ourselves because we're so in the detail of it, and if you're looking at it on a screen, you sometimes don't see it. Give it to somebody else. So just to round up with something that you might take away and you might be easy for you to remember. If I was to put all my advice today in a nutshell, I would say make it snappy. And I've managed to fit that into a nice little acronym that you might remember. So snappy CVs, be succinct. This is where, you know, it's better to say less than say more. Be aware, be careful about things that you don't need to put into your CV or things that are non-relevant. A is for your action verbs, good, strong action words. P is for professional, keep it professional, nice, neat, tidy layout, professional language. The other P is for positive. It's your glossy brochure. It's got to be positive, positive, positive all the way through, nothing negative on the CV. And Y is for you. So sometimes we don't like to blow our own trumpets, but your CV is the place where it is okay. And in fact, you need to talk about yourself and say all the great things that you can provide and the value you can give the employer so that you get through to that next stage. You get through from application stage to interview where you can wow them even further. And I know there's some talks on interviews today. So thank you for listening. Very best of luck, everybody, with your CVs and your job hunt. This is where you can find me, and I have stalled today. So feel free to come along and have a chat. Thank you very much.
Collette, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was super. And gosh, you went through that so thoroughly. Lots of comments coming in on how much people are enjoying and how useful they're finding
Oh,
You
great.
talk about tips for an effective CV. Sorry, it's the radio presenter in me. I
Yeah.
still end up saying CD. I know there's a whole generation of people saying, what even is a CD? Never mind. That's a whole other tangent.
Absolutely.
Karen has posed a question. Karen O'Connor, she says, how long is it relevant to keep your education on a CV? So I'm presuming, the days of putting your secondary school
Yeah,
gone.
Good question. Yeah, good question. And Karen, I'd say, it depends on what stage you're at. So, if you've been in the workforce 10, 15 years, that kind of thing, I would not mention your secondary school education. But if you're a graduate or a school leaver, you might want to put the secondary education in there. Sometimes, the young people haven't had a chance to have an awful lot of experience, and they're scrambling, looking for things to put into their CV. So if you've an impressive leaving cert and you're a young person, a school leaver or a graduate, you can put it in. But beyond that, and if you have third level education or you've been in the workforce for a long time, we can assume you have a decent level of education. One I came across actually just in the last year or so was whether to put in a qualification which is relevant or not. So what happened was the lady was in HR. She was looking for a HR job. She was also a qualified yoga teacher. So we talked about, should she put that in or not? So she decided to put it under her hobbies rather than her qualifications, just in case it gave the impression that she wasn't fully committed to the HR role. So just another point there on the qualifications.
Okay. I got a question in as well from Loredana, who says, I lost my job months ago. Should I add a sentence to clarify the gap? And what will be the best way to phrase it with a positive impact when employers read? At the moment, I haven't mentioned it in my CV. So I know you touched on gaps and whether or not to include them in your CV.
Yeah.
I think people would have a gap from COVID causing so much upset in the employment industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, gaps are often, they're no fault of our own. It could be COVID or any of us who've lived through the last recession, including myself, had a redundancy situation, at that time. So there's no shame in it. If it's in recent months, I would be inclined maybe to deal with it in a cover letter rather than in the CV, because the big advantage you have now, if you're currently in a gap, is that you're readily available. You could have an interview today and you could say, I can start next week. And that might mean an awful lot. So a good place to clarify that sometimes is a cover letter. I'm applying for this role, really interested in it. I was recently made redundant, or through COVID, I've lost employment and I now want to change sector or whatever it might be. And I'm readily available. I'm immediately available.
Okay, so that's good to point out in the cover letter then. And it won't matter in relation to scanning software. Do cover letters typically go through the scanning software as well?
I think that depends. Sometimes you're not asked for cover letter. But I'd say if possible, send it in. It's not going to do your application any harm. It could well be scanned. So if there's something relevant there, absolutely. Put it in. But I think people get very fixated on gaps and, really, they shouldn't be that important.
Irina has sent a query. She says, I have a foreign education and experience. She asks, how is that seen by Irish employers? I've no experience working in Ireland in the field that I have worked in at home, and it was longer ago. So you're talking about moving country to the same sector, but in a different country, under a second language, essentially.
Yeah, I wonder if she could state what the equivalent would be here, so if it's a qualification from a foreign country, could you say it's equivalent to a level 8 or a level 9 or a level 6 or whatever? As maybe if she could find out what the equivalent is, might be good to put.
Yeah, so a little bit of research then behind that might pay dividends. Angel Viteri says, do I apply for a job if I don't have the years of experience requested? I mean, would you be very bolshy to do it? Would you be very brave? Would you be looked on as a bit silly?
No, I think I always say to people, if you're not in, you can't win. So, they're not going to come to your door and offer you the job. So if they don't have the application, they're not going to contact you. I have had various clients recently who, one in particular, applied for a role, and I was thinking, gosh, he hasn't a hope. He hasn't, ticked the boxes, and he got the interview. And it was quite a big difference now. It was something like 5 years experience they wanted in a certain area, and he didn't have it. He could cobble kind of one or two together, but he got the interview. So I'd say absolutely send in your application. I saw a post recently that said if you hit all the essential requirements for the job, you're probably overqualified. So go for it.
Brilliant. Well, look, one last very quick question. Mairead Griffin says, I found you very helpful. Do all jobs need to be on the CV? And what about voluntary work?
Oh, yeah, I would say no, not all jobs need to be on the CV. So, think about what's your best, what's the most advantageous posts to put in. And voluntary work, yeah, I definitely would. It says a lot about you, and it can be used sometimes to link you to an area. If you don't have job experience, you might have voluntary experience, and that can mean a lot.
Super. So much information there. And one of my favorite tips that you said was Google strong action verbs for a CV, and it'll give you a list of things.
Oh, you'll find lists and lists of them. Yeah.
And also fancypants999@hotmail.com is the kind of email you want to get rid of if you're sending it out to potential employers.
Yeah, I think
still know people using those kinds of email addresses.
Is that yours, Ruth?
Well, you can try and contact that, but it's not me. Listen, it was lovely to get to hear you speak today, Collette. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome
for speaking today, and I wish you well for the future as we come out of all things COVID.
Hopefully. Yeah, best of luck, everybody. Thank you.